Federal authorities are intensifying the fight against Mexico's Sinaloa cartel. In the past couple of weeks, more than 200 suspected members were arrested in several states. Authorities also seized over 300 metric tons of chemicals that were going to be used to produce meth in Mexico. And the Treasury Department wants American financial institutions to check for suspected Chinese money laundering networks being used to smuggle fentanyl into the United States. The Treasury's financial crimes team says it discovered about $312 billion in suspected transactions from 2020 to 2024. Let's bring in Peter Schweizer from the Government Accountability Institute, somebody, full disclosure, I do some work with. Peter, you wrote about this in BloodMoney, one of your many books. You were on this a couple of years ago, but it seems like now that Trump's in office, they're finally paying attention to us. Explain how this is working and the Chinese involvement.
Yeah, no, I think it's so important that President Trump is taking a strategic approach to the fentanyl crisis, because Joe Biden thought it was just a health care issue. The bottom line is this is a Chinese operation. The drug cartels are the junior partners. The precursor chemicals, as about everybody now knows, come from China, but they're offloaded at the Port of Manzanillo in Mexico, which is run by a Chinese company. Those precursors are shipped up north, where the DEA says 2,000 Chinese chemists happen to be who turn this into the deadly cocktail of fentanyl. The drug cartels then use pill presses that the Chinese have sold to them at cost to produce these pills, which are killing so many Americans. And then the money laundering aspect of it. The drug cartels 20 years ago used banks in Latin America. They're now using state-owned banks. So this is a strategic initiative by China to punish and damage the United States. And I applaud the Trump administration, not just this operation to unwind part of the money laundering aspect and the nature of it, but also the Trump approach on tariffs, which is saying you are going to pay a price. We're not the type of people who are going to do the same thing back to you, but you are going to pay a price with tariffs as long as you continue to put this poison in the United States.
Yeah, people always, they ask me, oh, what does the Hunter Biden context mean? When they snuggle up with China, and then the DEA was telling the Biden administration, hey, there's billions of dollars of drugs flowing into the country. You telling me there's not a tie-in, a connection here? I'm telling you, that you've highlighted, I could spend an hour on just this. It's so infuriating. But I want to transition to George Soros. There are some serious allegations. They're only allegations, but there's some thought that maybe Rico charges should be brought with some of the organizations tied to George Soros. Tell us about that.
Yeah, of course, I'm not a lawyer, but I've spent a lot of time studying this. RICO is a statute, was passed in 1970 to target organized crime and individuals who were financing and supporting criminal activity, because what was happening is they were arresting the guy on the street, but the guys that were behind it, that were organizing it and financing it, weren't getting arrested. So RICO was passed. It's been used in the past against the Aryan nations. It's been used against white supremacists in Mississippi. The National Organization of Women tried unsuccessfully to use it against pro-life groups. And what it comes down to is this. George Soros on the left, Elon Musk on the right, completely have the right to finance political activities. The question becomes, if you are funding organizations that are engaging in criminal conduct, violent criminal conduct. Think, for example, of the Los Angeles riots, some of the groups behind that. Think about the attacks on Tesla that have taken place. There was an attack down in Georgia in 2023 where they were throwing fire bombs and attacking cops at a place called Cop City. The organizations behind that were funded by funding networks like the Tides Foundation and the Open Society Foundation, which George Soros, of course, funds. So the question is, if they are funding organizations that are known to engage in criminal, violent conduct, could they be charged under RICO? And I think there is a precedent there, and I think it's something that ought to be looked at by prosecutors, because, again, we want to have a very strong conversation in America about the future of our country. We do not want wealthy individuals funding violent protesters that are tearing down our cities and that are harming law enforcement officers.
Yeah, look, it's about the most American thing you can do to protest your government, right? That's the First Amendment right. But when it tips over into violence, when you have pallets of bricks showing up, that is potentially something that is, something that leads to violence. Last word, I have just a few seconds.
Yeah, no, I think the bottom line is this is something that ought to be investigated. If it's not occurring, if there's no criminal conspiracy here, that's fine. But it ought to at least be looked at by lawyers who can ascertain what is going on, because these protests, these violent protests, are highly organized and they are clearly well funded, Jason.
Yeah, it is clear. And they're not spontaneous the way so many of them are trying to suggest that they are when they show up with the same masks and the same information. Peter Schweizer, thank you so much for joining us.